Have you ever felt so broken that you just wanted to disappear? Imagine discovering the person you built your entire life with has been living a lie. One moment, you have a perfect home, a successful husband, and a future you believe in. The next, it all shatters into a million pieces, leaving you with nothing but shame and a suitcase full of broken dreams. This is the story of a woman who was erased, cast aside for a younger, more ambitious replacement. But what happens when the woman everyone forgot refuses to stay forgotten? This is what happens when she doesn't just get back on her feet. She returns to build an empire on the ashes of her old life, ready to face the man who destroyed her, not as a victim, but as his new reality. Stay tuned. The betrayal didn't announce itself with a scream. It was a whisper, a thin paper cut of a discovery in the sterile perfection of their Greenwich, Connecticut home. Amelia Hayes had always prided herself on managing the intricate details of her husband David Miller's life. She orchestrated his world so he could conquer it. But for the past 6 months, a detail had been nagging at her: the American Express statements. They were for a corporate card, one she didn't usually scrutinize, but the charges were odd. A recurring consultant fee, always a neat 5 figures, paid out to Advance Creative Solutions. Then the peripherals, dinners at per se that David claimed were solo business trips, suites at the Baccarat Hotel for investor meetings, and a particularly glaring charge from Cartier on their anniversary, a day David had forgotten until she'd reminded him with a painfully cheerful breakfast in bed. He'd presented her with flowers from the gas station later that evening, his apology smelling of expensive whiskey and a faint, unfamiliar perfume. That night, the paper cut deepened. David was asleep, a soft snore rumbling in his chest. His phone lay on the nightstand. Amelia, whose heart was thumping a rhythm of pure dread, had never violated his privacy before. It felt like stepping off a cliff. But she was already falling. His password was their son's birthday, a detail so sentimental it felt like a fresh betrayal. The texts were under the name Chloe Vance. Her profile picture showed a sharp, impossibly beautiful woman with ambitious eyes, probably 10 years younger than Amelia. The messages were a script of their secret life, written in the language of stolen moments and shared futures. "Can't wait to get you out of that museum and into our new life," Chloe had texted 2 days ago. "This deal closes, and we're free." "Soon," David had replied. "Just have to handle the exit strategy with Mia. She's fragile." Fragile. The word detonated in the silent room. Amelia looked at her hands. They were trembling. These were the hands that had typed his business school application, that had held his head after his father's funeral, that had rubbed his back every single night for 15 years. Fragile? No. They had made him strong. She walked through their home, a monument to their shared success, and saw it for what it was, a beautifully designed cage. Every piece of furniture she'd chosen, every swatch of paint, felt like a prop in a play where she was the unwitting fool. He hadn't just cheated, he had built a parallel life on the foundation she had laid for him, using her trust as mortar. The confrontation happened the next morning over coffee. The air was thick with unspoken words. She slid the printed bank statements across the marble island. "Vance Creative Solutions," she said, her voice unnervingly calm. "Is her creative solution finding new ways to spend my husband's money?" David's face, usually a mask of charming confidence, went through a series of micro-expressions: surprise, denial, then a flicker of anger at being caught. He tried to bluff. "Mia, that's a corporate expense, a new marketing consultant." "Does your marketing consultant require a Panthère de Cartier watch to brainstorm taglines?" Amelia's voice was low, lethal. She pushed his phone across the island, Chloe's texts open on the screen. "Or does she help with your exit strategy?" The charm evaporated, replaced by a cold, transactional hardness she'd only ever seen him use on business rivals. "Look, Mia, I didn't want you to find out this way." "This way?" she laughed, a sound that broke in the middle. As opposed to what? A memo? A formal press release announcing my redundancy? Don't be dramatic, he snapped, his guilt twisting into aggression. It's not like you didn't see this coming. We've been growing apart for years. You've let yourself go. You used to have ambition, a spark. Now all you do is manage the house. Every word was a hammer blow, expertly aimed at her deepest insecurities. She had given up her promising architectural career to support his. It had been a joint decision, a sacrifice for the family, for his focus. He had called it their partnership. Now he was calling it her failure. I supported you, she whispered, the words feeling useless. I built this life with you. And you were compensated for it, he said, his voice as cold as the marble countertop. A beautiful home, a comfortable life. Chloe understands my world now. She's part of it. You're not. The power imbalance was staggering. He held all the cards, the money, the career, the narrative. He had already written her out of their story. She was just the final detail to be managed, his fragile exit strategy. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and the man she had loved for half her life was gone. In his place was a stranger, a ruthless CEO dissolving a failed asset. Fine, she said, the single word hanging in the air. She walked upstairs, her movements stiff, robotic. She packed a single suitcase, not with the designer clothes David had bought her, but with the simple things she'd owned before him. Old jeans, a worn sketchbook, a handful of books. She took her personal savings, a modest amount she'd kept from a small inheritance, and her car keys. As she walked out the door, he was already on the phone, his voice hushed. It's done, he was saying. It was messy, but it's done. Amelia didn't look back. She drove until the sun came up, the tears finally coming, hot and silent. She wasn't just leaving a marriage. She was disappearing from a life where she had become invisible long before she walked out the door. She was fragile, yes, but even the most fragile things can be reforged in fire. The first few weeks were a study in erasure. Amelia drove north with no destination other than away. She ended up in a small, forgotten town in Vermont, renting a tiny, drafty cabin on the edge of a silent lake. The opulent life in Greenwich felt like a dream she'd woken from. Here, the only sounds were the wind in the pines and the frantic, desperate drumbeat of her own thoughts. She was 42 years old, with a 15-year gap in her resume and a heart shattered into dust. David's words echoed in the silence. You let yourself go. You have no ambition. He had assessed her worth and found it wanting. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She'd call her mother, who would offer platitudes like, he'll come to his senses, and men are just fools, which were as comforting as placing a bandage on a gaping wound. Her friends, mostly wives of David's colleagues, offered sympathy laced with a palpable fear that this could happen to them too. Their calls soon dwindled. She was a ghost at their brunch tables, a cautionary tale. She was officially, completely alone. It was in that crushing solitude that she opened the old sketchbook she'd packed. The pages were filled with designs from her university days, bold, innovative concepts for sustainable, modular architecture. They were ideas that had excited her, that had won her awards, that she had put in a box to collect dust when David's career took off. Flipping through the brittle pages, she felt a flicker of a person she barely recognized, a woman who was passionate, intelligent, and fiercely creative. The woman before David. The woman he had accused of having no spark. He hadn't extinguished it, he'd just convinced her to hide it under a bushel of domesticity. For days she did nothing but draw. She filled the sketchbook, then bought new ones. She drew on napkins, on receipts, on the back of junk mail. She designed eco-friendly homes that could be built with minimal waste, community spaces that integrated nature, and urban structures that generated their own power. The act of creation was the only thing that quieted the screaming in her head. It was a form of therapy, of reclaiming the part of herself she had sacrificed. One bleak afternoon, staring at a complex design for a software platform that could streamline the entire architectural planning and material sourcing process for sustainable builds, she realized it was more than a drawing. It was a billion-dollar idea. But an idea was just vapor without capital and technical expertise. On a desperate whim, she called the one person from her past who had never been part of David's world, Ben Carter. He had been her closest friend in architecture school, a brilliant, quirky genius who had veered into tech and was now a respected but under-the-radar software developer in San Francisco. They hadn't spoken in years, a casualty of her all-consuming marriage. He answered on the second ring. "Mia, is that really you?" She broke down, the whole sordid story pouring out of her in a torrent of grief and humiliation. Ben listened patiently, without judgment. When she was finished, hiccuping apologies for the incoherent rambling, he was silent for a long moment. "He said you had no ambition," Ben finally said, his voice tight with anger. "That man wouldn't know ambition if it bit him on his over-leveraged ass. Mia, you were the most talented person in our program. You made the rest of us look like we were building with Legos." His belief in her was a shock to her system, a jolt of electricity to a heart she thought had stopped. Hesitantly, she told him about her ideas, about the software platform she'd been designing. She expected him to humor her, to tell her it was a nice hobby. Instead, he grew excited. "Mia, this is revolutionary," he said, after she'd emailed him a few scans from her sketchbook. "This doesn't just streamline the process, it gamifies sustainable sourcing. It could completely disrupt the construction industry. You're talking about saving developers millions and making green building the most profitable option. It's brilliant." "It's just an idea in a book," she said, her voice small. "No," he insisted. "It's a blueprint, and I know how to build it. I've got some seed money saved up from my last buyout. It's not much, but it's enough to build a prototype. I'm willing to bet it all on you." Amelia was stunned into silence. Someone saw her. Not the discarded wife, not the fragile woman, but the architect, the innovator. "Why would you do that, Ben?" "Because I always knew you were meant to build empires, Mia," he said softly. "Not just manage someone else's house." That conversation was the turning point. Amelia Hayes, the wife, died in that Vermont cabin. In her place, a new woman began to emerge. She legally changed her name back to her maiden name, Amelia Sterling. It felt like shedding a skin. She and Ben worked relentlessly, communicating through video calls at all hours. He handled the coding and the back-end architecture. She refined the user interface, built the business model, and started networking with her old contacts in the sustainable materials industry. For 5 years, she remained a ghost. She poured every ounce of her pain, anger, and grief into her work. It became her obsession. She learned about venture capital, about corporate law, about scaling a tech company. The woman who David thought was fragile was negotiating multi-million-dollar funding rounds with Silicon Valley's most ruthless VCs. They called their company Aura for the energy-positive footprint their designs enabled. It grew slowly at first, then with explosive force. Their software became the gold standard for environmentally conscious construction, adopted by firms across Europe and Asia before it even made a significant splash in the US. Amelia Sterling was no longer hiding. She was quietly, methodically building an arsenal. She never checked David's social media. She never asked mutual acquaintances about him. He and the life they'd shared had become irrelevant. Her ambition now was not about revenge. It was about resurrection. 5 years after Amelia walked out of his life, David Miller was sitting in his glass-walled office overlooking the Manhattan skyline, feeling the familiar, gnawing dissatisfaction that had become the backdrop of his life. His marriage to Chloe was not the victory he had imagined. It was a constant, exhausting performance. Chloe had slipped into the role of the wealthy wife with ferocious dedication, but she lacked Amelia's quiet grace. Her ambition, which had once seemed exciting, now felt grasping. Their conversations revolved around which charity galas to attend, which rivals to snub, and how to get their names mentioned in the right society columns. The thrill of the affair had curdled into the mundane reality of a transaction. He had traded comfortable, unconditional love for a beautiful, high-maintenance accessory. His business, Miller Development, was also facing headwinds. The market was shifting. A new wave of regulations and public demand was pushing for green construction, an area David had always dismissed as boutique nonsense for hippies. His monolithic, energy-guzzling towers were starting to look like dinosaurs. He was in the middle of a bidding war for the landmark Hudson Yards renewal project, a massive undertaking that could either secure his legacy or bankrupt him. He needed this win. "The board is getting nervous about our sustainability pitch," his COO, a perpetually worried man named George, said during their morning meeting. "Our competitors are all using this new software platform, Aura. It's apparently cutting their material costs by 20% and fast-tracking their green certifications. We need to look into it." "Another tech fad," David grumbled, waving a dismissive hand. "Get them on the phone. See what they're peddling." An hour later, George was back, his face pale. "I have their pitch deck. David, you need to see this." He slid a tablet across the polished mahogany desk. The Aura logo was minimalist and elegant. The presentation was slick, showcasing a revolutionary platform that integrated AI-driven design, supply chain logistics, and automated environmental impact reporting. It was brilliant, and David felt a sickening knot of professional jealousy. Then he swiped to the Our Team page. His breath caught in his chest. There were two faces. One was a man he didn't recognize, Benjamin Carter, CTO. The other was a woman who was both a stranger and the most familiar person in the world. Her hair was cut in a sharp, stylish bob, not the long, soft waves she used to wear. She wore a tailored black dress, her posture radiating a power he'd never seen in her. But the eyes, they were the same. Intense, intelligent, and holding a depth that unsettled him. The name beneath the photo was Amelia Sterling. "Sterling," David said aloud, his voice hoarse. That was her maiden name. "Is there a connection?" George asked, oblivious. "No," David said quickly, his mind reeling. "No connection. It couldn't be. The Mia he knew was soft. She organized dinner parties and remembered his clients' birthdays. She couldn't build a tech empire that was threatening to eat his lunch. It was a coincidence. It had to be. But for the rest of the day, he couldn't shake her image. He found a recent keynote speech she'd given at a tech conference in Berlin. He watched it in the privacy of his office, the door locked. The woman on the stage was formidable. She spoke with an eloquence and authority that held the entire auditorium rapt. She was witty, insightful, and utterly in command of her subject. She didn't fidget. She didn't apologize with her body language. This wasn't the woman he had called fragile. This was a titan. He felt a bizarre mix of emotions. Disbelief, rage, and a sliver of something he couldn't name. Was it admiration, or was it fear? He had written her off as a casualty of his success, a footnote in his biography. But here she was, the author of a story that was about to collide with his own. That evening he went home to the sterile, museum-like penthouse he shared with Chloe. She was preening in front of a mirror, fastening a diamond necklace. "We're going to be late for the Guggenheim fundraiser," she said, her tone sharp. "You've been distracted all day. Is it the Hudson Yards bid?" "Something like that," he muttered, loosening his tie. "Don't worry," she said, turning to face him, a predatory gleam in her eye. "We'll get it. We always get what we want. We're Millers." David looked at her, at the diamonds, the perfect makeup, the hollow ambition in her eyes. He thought of the woman in the video, the quiet power she projected. He had told Mia she wasn't part of his world anymore. He was beginning to realize he had been profoundly wrong. She hadn't been cast out of his world. She had simply gone off and built her own, and it was bigger, smarter, and infinitely more powerful than he could have ever imagined. The echo of her name was no longer a whisper from the past. It was the sound of an approaching storm. The news broke on a Tuesday morning, delivered not by a phone call, but by the blaring headline of the Wall Street Journal's digital edition. Aura Technologies stuns real estate world with surprise bid, partners with global firm for Hudson Yards renewal. David stared at the headline on his monitor, the coffee in his hand forgotten. His company, Miller Development, had been the front runner. It was supposed to be his coronation, the project that would make him a legend. Instead, he'd been sideswiped. The article detailed how Aura, a software company, had made an unprecedented leap into development, forming a joint venture with a massive international construction conglomerate. Their bid wasn't just competitive, it was revolutionary. It promised a carbon-neutral development built faster and for a lower cost than any of the traditional bids, all thanks to their proprietary technology. The City Planning Commission was hailing it as the future of urban development. He read the quotes from Aura's CEO, Amelia Sterling. They were crisp, visionary, and devastatingly effective. "This isn't just about building structures," she was quoted as saying. "It's about building a sustainable future. The old way of doing things is no longer profitable or responsible. We're providing a better way." The old way. She was talking about him. He slammed his fist on the desk. "Get George in here, now!" George scurried in, already holding a copy of the press release. "We were completely blindsided, David. They kept it under wraps until the final submission. No one even knew they were in the running." "How?" David raged, pacing his office. "How does a software nerd from nowhere suddenly become a major player in New York real estate? Where did she get the capital? Who is backing her?" The questions were a smokescreen for the one he was really asking. How did Mia do this? The psychological whiplash was severe. He had cast her in the role of the tragic ex-wife, a woman who would likely fade into obscurity, perhaps remarry a quiet dentist, and live a small, suburban life. He had pitied her. This was an act of war. Chloe's reaction was less strategic and more primal. She saw it as a personal attack. "That pathetic woman is trying to ruin us," she shrieked when he told her, her carefully constructed composure cracking. "After all this time, it's revenge. She's doing this to get back at you, at us." "It's not about you, Chloe," David snapped, his patience worn thin. "This is business. She found a weakness in my market and she's exploiting it. It's a brilliant move." The admission left a sour taste in his mouth. He spent the next week in a feverish haze, digging into Aura Technologies. What he found only deepened his shock and gnawing sense of irrelevance. Aura wasn't a startup. It was a global powerhouse, quietly dominating the industry in Europe and Asia for the past 3 years. Amelia Sterling wasn't some scorned woman with a vendetta. She was a respected, globally recognized CEO, a visionary in the sustainable tech space. The financial backers weren't mysterious. They were some of the biggest and most respected venture capital firms in the world. He had been so consumed with his own small kingdom that he had failed to notice a new continent rising just over the horizon. The fallout was immediate. His investors, already jittery, started calling. Their confidence in his leadership was shaken. The Hudson Yards project was more than just a single deal. It was a bellwether for the future of the industry, and he had been on the wrong side of it. The narrative was that David Miller, the titan of New York real estate, had been outmaneuvered, made to look like a relic. He started seeing Amelia's face everywhere, on magazine covers, on financial news networks. Forbes ran a feature titled "The Quiet Architect: How Amelia Sterling is Building Tomorrow's World." The article touched briefly on her past, mentioning she'd left a conventional life behind to pursue her vision. The understatement was almost comical. She hadn't left a conventional life. She had escaped a cage he'd locked her in and had proceeded to build a rocket ship. The power imbalance that had defined their last conversation had not just been leveled. It had been inverted with tectonic force. He was the one who was now vulnerable, his future uncertain. She was the one with the momentum, the capital, and the story everyone wanted to hear. He found himself thinking about their last fight, his cruel, dismissive words. "You let yourself go. You have no ambition." He had meant to crush her, to make her small enough that leaving her wouldn't feel like a loss. He had succeeded for a time, but he had fundamentally misunderstood the woman he had been married to for 15 years. He had mistaken her quiet support for weakness, her sacrifice for a lack of drive. He had thrown away a diamond, thinking it was a simple stone, only to watch it be picked up, cut, and polished into something so brilliant it now cast a shadow over his entire world. The first tremor had passed. Now he could feel the ground beneath his feet beginning to crack. The meeting was unavoidable. The Hudson Yards renewal was a multi-party project, and a preliminary logistics meeting was called between all major stakeholders. Miller Development, as the owner of adjacent properties crucial for infrastructure access, had to be there. And so did Aura Technologies. David prepared for the meeting like a general preparing for battle. He had his team assemble a dossier on Amelia's company, her board, her financials. He rehearsed his talking points, crafting a persona of a magnanimous peer, unfazed by the recent turn of events. It was all a fragile facade over a chasm of anxiety. The meeting was held in a neutral location, a vast, sterile conference room on the 50th floor of a downtown skyscraper. The view of the city was panoramic, a kingdom they were all fighting over. David arrived early, wanting to own the space. She arrived exactly on time. Amelia Sterling was not the woman who had cried in his kitchen. She entered the room flanked by two people, Ben Carter, her CTO, and a stern-looking woman who was her legal counsel. She wore a dark navy dress that was the epitome of understated power. Her movements were economical and precise. Her eyes met his across the polished table. There was no flicker of pain, no hint of nostalgia. There was just a cool, calm assessment, the way she might look at a zoning map. In that single, unnerving glance, she communicated everything. "You have no power here." "David," she said, her voice even and professional. She didn't offer a hand. "Good to see you're well." "Amelia," he replied, forcing a smile that felt like cracking plaster. "Congratulations on the bid. It was impressive." "Thank you," she said, taking her seat directly opposite him. "We saw an opportunity for innovation and we took it." The meeting began, and David watched, mesmerized, as she commanded the room. She was fluent in the languages of finance, engineering, and environmental law. She fielded complex questions with ease, deferring to her team when necessary, but always remaining the clear center of gravity. He tried to find a flaw, a chink in her armor. He attempted to challenge her on a minor logistical point, a subtle jab about the practicalities of implementing her tech on such a massive scale. "That's a valid point, David," she said, turning her full attention to him. The use of his first name felt both intimate and dismissive. "It's a challenge we anticipated 2 years ago. Ben, could you bring up the simulation model for the staging area on West 33rd? Ben Carter tapped on his laptop, and a complex 3D model appeared on the large screen, showing a hyper-efficient solution that completely neutralized David's point. It was a polite, professional, and utterly brutal shutdown. He had tried to test her, and she had revealed she was playing chess while he was still setting up the checkers board. Throughout the 2-hour meeting, she never once broke her professional composure. But David, who knew her better than anyone in that room, saw the subtle tells. The way she held her pen, the slight tensing of her jaw when he spoke. The history between them was a ghost in the room, invisible to everyone but them. He had been the sun she orbited. Now she was a distant, cold star, and he was just a speck in her gravitational field. As the meeting concluded, people began to mingle. David saw his chance. He needed to speak to her alone, to try and break through the corporate armor. "Mia," he said, approaching her as she gathered her papers, using the name he hadn't said in 5 years. She stopped, her back still to him. She took a slow breath before turning around. Her eyes were like ice. "My name is Amelia," she said quietly, her voice dangerously low. "You will address me as such in a professional setting." He stammered, feeling his carefully constructed confidence disintegrate. "I'm stunned. How you did all this? I had no idea." A small, mirthless smile touched her lips. "Of course you didn't. You never looked. You saw a housewife, a support system. You never bothered to look at the architect standing right beside you." "I'm sorry," he heard himself say, and was shocked to find that he might actually mean it. For how things ended." She looked at him, and for a fleeting second he saw a flicker of the woman he'd wounded. A flash of pain, so quick he almost missed it. But then it was gone, replaced by an impenetrable calm. "Don't be," she said, her voice softening just enough to be devastating. "You think your betrayal was the end of my story. You were wrong. It was the beginning. What you did to me was cruel, but it was also a gift. You set me free. You showed me exactly what I was worth when I was attached to you, which was nothing, so I decided to find out what I was worth on my own." She slid her tablet into her briefcase and snapped it shut. The sound echoed in the cavernous room. "Now, if you'll excuse me," she said, her professional mask firmly back in place, "I have an empire to run." She walked away without a backward glance, leaving David standing alone in the glass conference room, feeling smaller and more transparent than he ever had in his life. The defeat at the Hudson Yards meeting was a psychological blow, but the business repercussions were far more tangible. David's world, once a fortress of steel and concrete, began to unravel thread by thread. The Aura partnership wasn't just a one-off deal, it was a paradigm shift. Other developers, seeing the immense financial and PR benefits, started flocking to Aura's platform. Miller Development's project pipeline began to dry up. Banks that had once eagerly extended him credit were now demanding more rigorous sustainability reports his company was ill-equipped to produce. He was a captain of a fleet of galleons in the age of steamships. The pressure mounted, and the cracks in his new life with Chloe began to widen into fissures. The lifestyle she demanded was predicated on continuous, ostentatious success. As his business faltered, her anxiety manifested as sharp, cutting criticisms. "What do you mean we have to cut back on the Hamptons house renovation?" she demanded one evening, her voice shrill. "People will talk. They'll think we're in trouble." "We are in trouble," he'd yelled back, the frustration of the past few months boiling over. "While you've been picking out Italian marble, my company has been bleeding. This is real, Chloe." "This is her fault," Chloe spat, her face contorted with a venom that shocked him. "Your mousy little ex-wife. She's trying to destroy you. You need to fight back. Sue her. Dig up some dirt on her." David looked at her, at this woman he had upended his life for, and felt a profound sense of exhaustion. Her solution to everything was to attack, to tear down. He was beginning to realize that Amelia's strength was in her ability to build. Chloe's was only in her ability to take. Desperate, Chloe decided to take matters into her own hands. Without telling David, she arranged to, accidentally, run into Amelia at a coffee shop near Aura's headquarters. It was a disaster. Amelia, holding a latte and talking on the phone, simply looked up, registered Chloe's presence with a flicker of disinterest, and said into the phone, "Sorry, Ben, I have to deal with a minor, irrelevant distraction. I'll call you back." She ended the call and looked at Chloe. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone the same one you might use for a pushy salesperson. "I think we should talk," Chloe began, trying to project an air of confidence. "I don't," Amelia replied, taking a sip of her coffee. "We have nothing to discuss. My business is with David's company, not with his personal arrangements." The dismissal was so absolute, so complete, that it left Chloe speechless. She had expected a catfight, tears, a dramatic confrontation. Instead, she had been swatted away like a gnat. She returned to the penthouse fuming, her sense of humiliation palpable. The incident only served to further poison her relationship with David. Meanwhile, David was forced into a position he had never known: humility. He was losing. Badly. His attempts to compete by slashing prices only made him look desperate. His legacy was crumbling. One night, alone in his office after another brutal day of investor calls, he found himself thinking not about the business, but about Mia. He remembered a time, early in their marriage, when his first solo project had nearly gone bankrupt. He'd come home, defeated, and she had stayed up with him all night, brainstorming solutions, making coffee, and refusing to let him give up. She had been his partner in every sense of the word. He picked up the phone and called her personal assistant, requesting a private meeting. He didn't know what he was going to say. Apologize? Beg? He just knew he had to talk to the architect, not the CEO. To his surprise, she agreed. They met at a quiet, empty bar in a hotel downtown. She arrived looking tired, the weight of her own responsibilities showing in the faint lines around her eyes. For a moment, she looked like the Mia he remembered. "What do you want, David?" she asked, cutting straight to the point. "I wanted to apologize," he said, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. "Properly, not in a boardroom, for everything, for what I said, for what I did. I was a fool." She looked at him, her gaze analytical, searching. "Is this apology because you're genuinely sorry, or because your company is on the verge of collapse and you think I can help you?" The question was so direct, so incisive that he couldn't lie. "I don't know," he admitted, the honesty feeling like a surrender. "Maybe both. Does it matter?" "Yes," she said softly. "It matters. One is about remorse, the other is about strategy." She leaned forward. "Let me tell you something you don't know. The day I left, I drove to a motel. I had about $7,000 to my name. I sat on the bed and I thought about ending everything. That's how fragile I was. Your words almost killed me, David." He flinched as if struck. He had never considered the depth of her despair, only the inconvenience of her presence. "But I didn't," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "I decided that the best revenge wasn't to ruin you. I never cared enough to do that. The best revenge was to prove you wrong, to prove that I wasn't nothing without you. So I built. I took all that pain and anger and I used it as fuel. Aura wasn't built to destroy you. It was built to save me." She stood up, leaving her untouched drink on the table. "Your company is failing because you're a dinosaur. You didn't adapt. You didn't innovate. You got arrogant and lazy. That has nothing to do with me. That's all on you." She paused at the door. "Goodbye, David. I truly hope you find a way to start over. Everyone deserves that chance." As she walked out, David realized his folly. He had come here seeking absolution or a lifeline, still thinking this was somehow about him. But her story had moved on. He wasn't the villain in her narrative anymore. He was just the prologue. The end for Miller Development came faster than David could have imagined. A key lender, spooked by the company's declining project portfolio, called in a massive loan. The dominoes began to fall. Within a month, he was facing bankruptcy. The empire he had spent a lifetime building was about to be sold off for parts. His life with Chloe imploded. Faced with the reality of losing the penthouse, the cars, and the status she had fought so hard for, she revealed her true nature. There were no words of support, no partnership in crisis. There was only blame and a cold, transactional departure. "I didn't sign up for this," she told him, standing in the half-empty living room as movers packed her designer clothes into boxes. "I'm not going to be dragged down with you." She left. Her final act not one of passion or anger, but of simple, self-serving calculation. David was no longer a good investment. Left alone in the cavernous, silent apartment, David was forced to confront the totality of his failure. He had lost his first wife through betrayal and his second through bankruptcy. He had sacrificed genuine love for fleeting ego and ended up with neither. His lawyers told him his only option was to sell the company's assets in a bankruptcy auction. It was the ultimate humiliation. His name, his legacy, would be picked apart by his rivals. Then, a week before the auction, he received an unexpected offer. It came from a private equity firm he'd never heard of, Sterling Capital. The offer was to purchase Miller Development's entire asset portfolio, its land holdings, its existing buildings, its brand, for a price that was just enough to settle all its debts and leave David with a small but not insignificant amount of seed money to start over. It was a lifeline, a clean exit that would allow him to avoid the shame of a public auction. He knew immediately who was behind it. His lawyer arranged the final meeting. It was in the same building as their last meeting, but this time in a smaller, more private office. Amelia was there alone, dressed in simple slacks and a blouse. There were no lawyers, no entourage. "Why?" David asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Why do this? You could have let me be torn apart at the auction. You could have bought my best assets for pennies on the dollar." Amelia looked out the window at the city below. "Because that's what you would have done," she said calmly. "That's what Chloe would have done. Tearing things down is easy. It requires no vision." She turned to face him. "I'm not buying your company to punish you, David. I'm buying it for the land. You were always good at acquiring prime real estate. Your weakness was what you built on it. I'm going to use your old properties to build the future. Affordable, sustainable housing, community centers, green spaces. Your legacy of concrete and glass is going to become my legacy of life and growth." The power play was breathtaking in its scope and its mercy. She wasn't just defeating him, she was transforming his failures into her success. She was not seeking revenge, she was seeking redemption, not for him, but for the very ground he had built upon. "The offer is fair," she continued, her tone all business now. "It clears your name, settles your debts, and gives you a chance to walk away with some dignity. What you do next is up to you." He was speechless. The woman he had called fragile was offering him a grace he had never offered her and a lesson he would never forget. He had measured his life in square footage and profit margins. She was measuring hers in impact and innovation. "I accept," he said, his voice barely a whisper. He signed the papers, the act of his pen dissolving his entire life's work. As he slid the documents across the table, he felt not the sting of defeat, but the strange, clean slate feeling of release. The weight of his own arrogance was finally lifted. "Thank you, Mia," he said, the name slipping out instinctively, but this time it felt different. It was a name spoken with a respect he had never truly had before. She gave a small, sad smile. "My name is Amelia," she corrected him gently. "Mia was a long time ago. That woman is gone." She was right. The woman he had destroyed was gone. But the woman who had risen from her ashes was now, in the most unexpected way, offering him the chance to do the same. A year later, the New York skyline was changing. On the site of what was once destined to be another monolithic Miller Tower, a new kind of structure was rising. It was a marvel of green architecture, covered in vertical gardens and solar panels, a living, breathing building that was the flagship of Aura's new development arm. Amelia Sterling stood on a nearby rooftop with Ben Carter, looking at the project. They were partners in every sense of the word now, their friendship and professional respect having deepened into a quiet, steady love built not on power dynamics, but on shared vision. "It's beautiful," Ben said, putting his arm around her. "It's a start," she replied, a genuine smile on her face. Her life was no longer defined by the past. The pain was still a part of her story, a scar she would always carry, but it was no longer an open wound. It was a reminder of the strength she hadn't known she possessed. Her wealth and power were not the rewards. They were tools. The reward was this, the act of creation, of building something meaningful and lasting. She rarely thought of David. From what she'd heard through the grapevine, he had moved to the Midwest, using the money from the sale to start a small consulting firm, helping small towns with responsible urban planning. He was living a smaller, quieter life. She hoped he had found some measure of peace. Her final act toward him hadn't been about forgiveness. She wasn't sure she could ever truly forgive the cruelty. but about closing a chapter on her own terms. She had refused to let his bitterness define the end of their story. As she stood there, watching the sun set behind her new building, she thought about the woman in the Vermont cabin, sketching out her dreams in a fit of despair. She had thought she was designing buildings. She now knew she had been drawing a blueprint for her own soul. She had lost a husband and a life she thought she wanted. But in the silence and the wreckage, she had found something far more valuable: herself. Not the wife, not the victim, not the CEO, but Amelia, the architect, the builder, the survivor. And for the first time in a very, very long time, she felt truly, unshakably whole. And that's how Amelia Sterling didn't just rebuild her life. She redesigned the entire world around her. Her story isn't just about the satisfaction of revenge, it's about the profound power of self-worth. It shows that sometimes the most devastating betrayals can become the catalysts for our greatest transformations. What David saw as an ending was, for her, a groundbreaking ceremony for a new and better life. What did you think of Amelia's journey? Do you believe her final act toward David was one of mercy or the ultimate power move? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story. Thank you for watching.
Floyd Short orchestrated the invitation with surgical cruelty. To him, his ex-wife Maria was a forgotten mistake, a woman from the barrio he'd once tried to fix before callously tossing her aside. He pictured her arriving at his opulent wedding, looking exactly as he'd left her 10 years prior. Pregnant, penniless, and broken. It was meant to be his final, public triumph, a testament to his superior choices. But Floyd made a fatal error in judgment. He assumed the woman he had branded nothing had remained nothing. He had no idea that from the ashes of his betrayal, Maria had forged an empire, and he certainly didn't know she was bringing his twin sons to witness his carefully constructed world shatter. The pregnancy test trembled in Maria Saavedra's hands as she stared at the 2 pink lines that would change everything. After 3 years of marriage and 2 years of trying to conceive, she was finally carrying Floyd's child. Her heart raced with pure joy as she imagined his reaction to the news. She had planned this moment with meticulous care. Floyd's favorite dinner was warming in the oven, ribeye steaks from the expensive butcher shop he preferred, paired with the 1995 Bordeaux they'd been saving since their honeymoon. Candles flickered on their dining room table, casting warm light over the penthouse apartment they'd shared for 2 years. Rose petals formed a heart shape around his place setting, and she'd even wrapped a tiny pair of baby shoes to present, alongside the test. At 26, Maria still felt incredibly lucky to be married to Floyd Short. When they'd met at that charity auction 4 years ago, she'd been a community college student working as a caterer's assistant. He was the most successful man who'd ever noticed her. Harvard-educated, owner of a thriving real estate development company, and devastatingly handsome in his tailored suits. Their whirlwind courtship had felt like a fairy tale. Expensive restaurants, weekend trips to his family's lake house, and a proposal that had literally taken her breath away. Tonight, she would tell him they were going to be parents, and their story would reach its perfect conclusion. The sound of Floyd's key in the lock made her pulse quicken with anticipation. She quickly tucked the pregnancy test behind her back, wanting to savor the moment when she saw joy spread across his handsome face. "Floyd, honey," she called out, practically vibrating with excitement. "I have the most incredible news to share with you." But the man who walked through the door wasn't the loving husband she expected. Floyd's short 6-foot frame filled the doorway, his expensive Italian suit soaked from the October rain. But it was his expression that stopped her cold. His dark eyes, usually warm when they looked at her, were now frigid as winter stones. There was something different about him tonight, something cruel and distant she'd never seen before. "Pack your things, Maria." His voice was flat, emotionless. "I want you out of here by tomorrow morning." The pregnancy test slipped from Maria's numb fingers. It clattered onto the hardwood floor with a sound that seemed to echo in the sudden, devastating silence. "What did you just say?" Her voice came out as barely a whisper. Floyd stepped over the fallen test without even glancing down. His movements were sharp and deliberate as he loosened his silk tie, the burgundy one she'd given him for their second anniversary. "You heard me perfectly well, Maria. This charade is over. I'm done pretending, and I'm definitely done with you." Maria's legs felt unsteady beneath her. The romantic dinner, the candles, the rose petals, everything seemed to mock her now. "Floyd, please, there's something important I need to tell you. Nothing you could possibly say matters anymore." He brushed past her toward their bedroom, his shoulder knocking against hers with deliberate coldness. "I found someone who actually deserves to be with a successful man like me. Someone who isn't." He paused at the bedroom doorway, turning to look at her with undisguised disgust. "Someone who isn't beneath me." Each word was carefully chosen to wound. Maria pressed her hand to her chest, struggling to breathe as the room seemed to spin. "Beneath you? Floyd, we're married. We took vows in front of your family, my family. We promised to love each other through everything." His laughter was sharp and bitter. "Vows? To you?" Floyd began throwing his clothes into expensive leather luggage, each movement aggressive and dismissive. "Maria, look at yourself. Really look. You come from the barrio. Your family works in factories and cleans houses for a living. You barely finished community college with a degree that means nothing in the real world." These were things he'd once claimed to love about her: her authentic background, her humble family, her down-to-earth nature. Now, they were weapons in his hands. "But you said you loved me exactly as I am," Maria whispered. "You said my family was warm and real, unlike the cold people in your social circle. You said none of that other stuff mattered." "I lied." Floyd's voice was flat, emotionless. "I was young and thought maybe I could make something out of you, clean you up, teach you how to act around important people. But you can't polish trash, can you, Maria?" Maria sank onto their king-sized bed, the bed where they'd made love just 3 nights ago, where he'd whispered promises about their future together. "How can you say these things to me? This isn't you, Floyd. This isn't the man I fell in love with. This is exactly who I am." Floyd spun around, his face twisted with something that looked like hatred. "I'm being honest for the first time in this entire relationship. You want to know what's cruel? Being trapped with someone who will never be good enough. Having to pretend that you belong in my world when everyone at my office whispers about how I'm married down." Summoning every ounce of courage she had left, Maria picked up the pregnancy test from the floor with shaking hands. Maybe this would change everything. Maybe when he knew about the baby, the man she'd fallen in love with would return. "I'm pregnant, Floyd. We're going to have a baby." Floyd stopped packing. For one brief, desperate moment, Maria thought she saw something flicker in his eyes. Surprise, maybe even a hint of the man she'd married. But when he spoke, his voice was even colder than before. "Not my problem." The words hit her like a physical blow. "What do you mean, not your problem? This is your child, our child." "My child?" Floyd's laugh was vicious, cutting. "With you? I seriously doubt it's even mine. You probably got knocked up by some guy from your old neighborhood, and now you're trying to pin it on me." The accusation was so shocking, so completely unfounded, that Maria couldn't even respond. She stared at this stranger wearing her husband's face, wondering when everything had gone so horribly wrong. "But even if it is mine," Floyd continued, zipping up his suitcase with violent force, "I don't want it. I don't want any reminder of the biggest mistake I ever made. Marrying you." Maria doubled over as if he'd punched her in the stomach, her free hand moving instinctively to protect her still flat belly. "Please," she whispered through her tears, "please don't do this. We can work through this. I love you so much. Your love means nothing to me." Floyd grabbed his suitcase and headed for the door, not even looking back at her crumpled form. "My lawyer will be in touch about the divorce. Don't even think about trying to contact me. Don't ask for money. Don't ask for anything. You're nothing to me now, Maria. You always were nothing, and you always will be nothing." The door slammed shut with such force that their wedding picture fell from the wall, the glass shattering across the floor in 1,000 glittering pieces. Maria collapsed beside the broken frame, clutching the pregnancy test to her chest as sobs racked her body. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, and the rain grew heavier. The candle still flickered on the dining table, and the heart made of rose petals remained untouched, a mocking reminder of dreams that had just been destroyed. As Maria knelt among the shattered glass of their wedding photo, holding the proof of new life in her hands, she had no idea that this moment of complete devastation would become the foundation for a transformation that would make Floyd's cruelty the biggest mistake of his life. 4 months after Floyd left, Maria stood in front of the cracked mirror in her studio apartment's tiny bathroom, hardly recognizing the woman staring back at her. Dark circles ringed her once bright eyes, telling the story of too many sleepless nights spent worrying about bills, medical expenses, and an uncertain future. Her maternity clothes, thrift store finds, and hand-me-downs from her sister, Elena, hung loosely on her frame. Despite carrying a baby, she'd actually lost weight, because food had become a luxury she couldn't always afford. The apartment was a universe away from the penthouse she'd shared with Floyd, located in the most dangerous part of the city, where sirens wailed through the night, and gunshots occasionally echoed off the thin walls. It was all she could afford on her wages from 3 part-time jobs. The single room served as a bedroom, living room, and kitchen. A hot plate sat on a card table that doubled as her dining area, and her bed was a mattress on the floor that she'd bought secondhand for $40. Floyd's divorce had been swift and merciless. His team of expensive lawyers had somehow managed to prove she wasn't entitled to any of their shared assets. Everything had been in Floyd's name from the beginning. She'd walked away from 3 years of marriage with a single suitcase of clothes and a heart full of shattered dreams. Maria pressed her hand to her rounded belly, feeling the baby move restlessly inside her. At 6 months pregnant, she was working as many hours as her body could handle, cleaning offices from midnight to 6 a.m., waitressing at a diner during lunch hours, and doing alterations for a seamstress in the evenings. The work was backbreaking, but the combined income barely covered her $400 monthly rent and the cheapest groceries she could find. "I'm sorry, little one," she whispered to her unborn child. "I know this isn't the life I promised you, but I'm going to do better, somehow." A sharp knock at her door interrupted her quiet moment. Maria knew that knock. Mrs. Patterson, her landlord, and she was 4 days late on rent. "Mrs. Short." The elderly woman's voice was harsh through the thin door. "I know you're in there." Maria took a deep breath and opened the door, trying to summon a smile. "Mrs. Patterson, I was just about to come see you. I'll have the rest of the rent by Friday, I promise." The landlord's eyes narrowed as they swept over Maria's obviously pregnant form. "You said that last month, girl. I'm running a business here, not a charity for unwed mothers." "I'm not unwed. I'm divorced," Maria said quietly. "And please, just give me until Friday. I'm picking up extra shifts." "Friday, then you're out. And next time, you better think twice before getting yourself knocked up by some man who won't stick around." Mrs. Patterson's words stung because they were so close to the truth, even if she had the facts wrong. After the landlord left, Maria sank onto her mattress and buried her face in her hands. She had called her family for help. Elena sent what little money she could spare from her job as a hotel housekeeper. But Elena had 3 kids of her own to support. Their mother, who worked double shifts at a textile factory, had already given Maria her entire savings, $230. Maria's stomach growled loudly, reminding her that she'd skipped breakfast to save money. She opened her nearly empty refrigerator and pulled out a container of rice and beans, the cheapest meal she could make that still provided some nutrition for the baby. As she heated it on the hot plate, tears began to fall. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. She should be in a beautiful nursery right now, surrounded by love and excitement about becoming a mother. Instead, she was alone, broke, and terrified about bringing a child into this world with nothing to offer. 2 months later, Maria was scrubbing floors at the Meridian office complex when the first contraction hit her like a lightning bolt. She was in the executive washroom on the 20th floor, alone except for the sound of her own labored breathing echoing off the marble walls. "No," she whispered, panic rising in her chest as another contraction gripped her. "Please, not yet, it's too early." She was only 34 weeks pregnant. The baby wasn't supposed to come for another month and a half. But the contractions kept coming, faster and stronger with each wave. Maria managed to call Elena from the office phone, her voice shaking with fear and pain. "Elena, something's wrong. The baby's coming and I'm at work." "Stay exactly where you are, Mika." Elena's voice was fierce with protective love. "I'm calling an ambulance and coming to get you right now." The paramedics found Maria collapsed in the hallway outside the washroom, clutching her belly as another contraction tore through her. "Ma'am, how far along are you?" the EMT asked as they lifted her onto a gurney. 34 weeks, Maria gasped. "But there's something else. I think there might be 2 babies." The ride to County General Hospital was a blur of sirens and pain. Elena met them at the emergency room, her face pale with worry as she ran alongside Maria's gurney. "The babies," Maria gasped, reaching for her sister's hand. "Elena, what if something's wrong with them? What if they're not okay?" "They're going to be fine," Elena said firmly, though Maria could see the fear in her eyes. "You're going to be fine. We're going to get through this together." The emergency room was chaos. Gunshot victims, overdoses, and families crying in languages Maria didn't recognize. It took Elena arguing with 3 different nurses before they finally took Maria back to a delivery room. "Twins," confirmed Dr. Williams, a tired-looking resident who couldn't have been much older than Maria herself. "And they're coming whether we're ready or not. Are you prepared to be a mother of 2? Maria wanted to laugh at the absurdity of the question. Prepared? She had no insurance, no money for hospital bills, no nursery waiting at home. She had nothing except a fierce love for these babies she hadn't even met yet. But as the next contraction hit, she realized that preparation was a luxury she couldn't afford. Ready or not, her children were coming into the world tonight. 14 hours later, at 3:47 a.m. on a cold February morning, Diego Miguel Saavedra entered the world, screaming at the top of his lungs as if announcing his intention to fight for everything life had to offer. 2 minutes later, his brother, Carlos Antonio, followed, more quietly, but Maria could see the same determination in his dark eyes. "They're beautiful, Mika," Elena whispered, tears streaming down her face as she looked at her nephews. "Look at them. They're perfect." Maria held her sons for the first time, one in each arm, and felt something shift deep inside her chest. They were so small. Diego barely 5.2 pounds, Carlos just over 5. But they were fighters. Diego had Floyd's strong jaw and commanding presence, even as a newborn, while Carlos had inherited Maria's gentler features, but with an unmistakable strength in his tiny grip. "I'm sorry," she whispered to them as they slept in her arms. "I'm sorry I can't give you everything you deserve right now, but I promise you this. I will never give up. I will never stop fighting for you. You deserve so much more than this. And somehow, some way, I'm going to make sure you get it." Elena squeezed Maria's shoulder gently. "What are you going to do about Floyd? I mean, those are his sons. He should know. Maria's voice was firm despite her exhaustion. He made his choice when he called me nothing and walked away. These beautiful boys are not nothing, and they don't need a father who would see them as burdens instead of blessings. But the money, Maria! You can't raise 2 babies alone with no help. Maria looked down at Diego and Carlos, both sleeping peacefully, despite being born into poverty and uncertainty. I won't be alone. I have them, and they have me. We're a family now. That's what matters. 3 weeks later, the reality of caring for twin newborns in a studio apartment with no money and no help was overwhelming, beyond anything Maria had imagined. The babies cried in shifts, ensuring she never got more than an hour of sleep at a time. Her body ached from childbirth, but she couldn't afford to take time off work. She was back to cleaning offices within a week of giving birth, strapping the twins to her chest in second-hand baby carriers. One particularly brutal night, when both babies had been crying for 3 straight hours and Maria hadn't slept in 36 hours, she found herself sobbing right along with them. She was sitting on the floor of her apartment at 2 a.m., a baby in each arm, wondering if she was strong enough for this impossible task. That's when she looked down at Diego, who had suddenly stopped crying and was staring up at her with those serious, dark eyes that seemed far too wise for a newborn. Something in his gaze seemed to communicate directly with her heart. "We are counting on you, Mama. Don't give up on us." "You're right," she whispered to him. Then looked at Carlos, who was also watching her intently with Floyd's dark eyes, but her own gentle expression. "You're both right. I can't fall apart. You two are the best things that ever happened to me, and I'm going to prove to the world and to myself that we don't need anybody else." She wiped her tears and stood up, settling both boys in the crib Elena had found at a yard sale. "Starting tomorrow, we begin again. I don't know how yet, but I promise you both, your mama is going to be somebody, and you're going to grow up knowing that you can be anything you want to be, no matter where you come from." As if they understood, both babies settled down and fell asleep. Maria stood over their crib for a long time, watching them breathe, and felt something she hadn't experienced since the night Floyd left her. Hope. It was just a tiny spark, barely alive after months of despair. But it was there, growing stronger as she watched her sons sleep. She had no money, no husband, no support system beyond her overworked family. But she had something Floyd would never understand. She had love, and she had a determination that had been forged in the fire of absolute necessity. "Floyd Short," she whispered into the darkness. "Wherever you are, with your perfect new life, you have no idea what you threw away. But someday, I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you that these boys and I are worth more than you ever imagined." Outside her window, the first hints of dawn were beginning to touch the sky. Maria sat down in the broken recliner Elena had found for her and closed her eyes for a few minutes of rest before the boys woke up again. She didn't know it yet, but this was the night everything began to change. This was the night Maria Saavedra stopped being a victim and started becoming the woman who would one day show Floyd Short the true meaning of regret. 5 years after the twins were born, Maria wiped flour from her hands and glanced at the kitchen clock. 4:30 a.m. In the small backyard of their rented 2-bedroom house, she could see Diego and Carlos sleeping peacefully in the room they shared, surrounded by the scent of fresh tamales, pozole, and tres leches cake that would feed the Martinez family reunion later today. The kitchen counter was covered with aluminum containers, 50 dozen tamales, 3 gallons of pozole, 2 dozen enchilada casseroles, and 5 cakes. This single catering order would bring in $800, more than she used to make in a month during those desperate early days. What had started as pure survival had evolved into something unexpected. During the twins' first year, When Maria was working 3 jobs just to keep their tiny apartment, she'd begun cooking extra portions of her grandmother's recipes and selling them to co-workers. Her supervisor at the office cleaning company, Mrs. Rodriguez, had been the first to pay her $20 for a tray of homemade tamales. "Maria, these are better than my own mother's," Mrs. Rodriguez had said. "Can you make them for my daughter's quinceañera?" That quinceañera, 30 guests, a $150 total payment, had been Maria's first real catering job. Word spread through the Latino community faster than she'd expected. Within 6 months, she was getting calls every weekend. Within a year, she'd saved enough to quit 2 of her 3 jobs and focus on building what she'd started calling Maria's Kitchen. Now, at 28, Maria had clients booked 3 months in advance. She'd obtained her business license, built relationships with reliable suppliers, and even hired 2 part-time assistants for larger events. More importantly, she'd moved the twins to a safe neighborhood where they could play outside without her constant worry. "Mama, it smells like heaven in here," Diego said, appearing in the kitchen doorway with his hair standing up at odd angles. At 5 years old, he was already showing signs of the natural leadership that would define him, always the first to wake up, always checking on his quieter brother, Carlos. "Good morning, mijo. Did we wake you up?" "Carlos is still sleeping, but I wanted to help." Diego climbed onto the step stool Maria had bought him and began carefully arranging napkins in the delivery boxes. Even at 5, he understood that this work was important, that it was how they'd built their new life. The transformation hadn't been easy. It had required 18-hour days, learning business skills through library books and community college night courses, and more exhaustion than Maria had known was possible. But every sacrifice had been worth it to see her sons thriving. Carlos appeared in the doorway, quieter and more observant than his brother. "Mama, are we rich now?" The question made Maria smile. "We are not rich, sweetheart, but we're secure. We have enough. And more importantly, we have each other." "Mrs. Henderson at daycare says you're an entrepreneur." Maria replied, "That means someone who builds their own business." "Like a boss?" Diego asked, his eyes lighting up. "Exactly like a boss. Your mama is the boss of her own company now." Later that morning, after delivering the Martinez order, Maria drove to her appointment with Rosa Castillo, who wanted to hire her for what could be her biggest contract yet, a wedding for 200 guests with a budget of $5,000. The Castillo family lived in Riverside Hills, the wealthy neighborhood where Maria had once lived with Floyd. As she parked her used Honda in the circular driveway, she felt a familiar flutter of nerves. These consultations with affluent clients still reminded her of the world she'd briefly inhabited, a world of marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and people who measured worth by appearances. But Maria was different now. She wore her best business suit, not expensive but clean and professional, and carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd built something real with her own hands. Mrs. Castillo greeted her at the door, an elegant woman in her 50s who managed to be both wealthy and genuinely warm. "Ms. Saavedra, please come in. I've heard wonderful things about your work." They sat in a living room that was bigger than Maria's entire house, discussing menu options and logistics. Maria had learned to navigate these conversations with professional confidence, never intimidated, but always respectful. "Your references are exceptional," Mrs. Castillo said, reviewing the portfolio Maria had prepared. "The Hernandez anniversary party, the Torres quinceañera. The photos of your food are absolutely beautiful. Thank you. I take pride in both taste and presentation. Every event reflects the family's personality and traditions." Mrs. Castillo smiled. "I have to ask, how did you get started? You seem so young to have built such a reputation." Maria had prepared for this question. "I started cooking out of necessity when my sons were babies. I'm a single mother, and I needed to find a way to support them while staying home. What began as survival became a passion." "Single mother? How old are your children?" "Twin boys, 5 years old. They're the reason I work so hard. I want them to have opportunities I didn't have." Mrs. Castillo's expression softened. "That's admirable. Building a business while raising twins alone, that takes incredible strength. Strength. Maria had heard that word so often now, but it still felt strange. She didn't feel strong most days. She felt tired, worried, constantly pushing herself to do more, be more, achieve more. But maybe that was what strength actually looked like. Not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear stop you. "Can you handle an event this size?" Mrs. Castillo asked. 200 guests is quite ambitious." "Absolutely. I work with a network of trusted assistants for larger events, and I can provide references from similar occasions." Maria's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice steady. This contract would change everything. The deposit alone would let her put a down payment on a house. "Wonderful. I'd like to book you for June 15th. As Maria drove home with the signed contract, her mind raced with possibilities. This success would lead to more referrals, bigger events, maybe even the opportunity to open an actual restaurant someday. But more than business growth, she felt something deeper. Vindication. Floyd had called her nothing. He'd said she came from nothing and would always be nothing. But tonight, she would go home to her sons in their safe house with a contract that would earn her more in one weekend than Floyd had ever given her in monthly allowances. That evening, after Diego and Carlos were asleep, Maria sat at her kitchen table with her business accounting spread before her. In 5 years, she'd gone from 3 part-time jobs that barely paid rent to a business that was booked solid through the summer. Her credit score had improved enough to qualify for a small business loan. She was even taking business classes at the community college on Saturday mornings. The phone rang, interrupting her calculations. "Maria, it's Carmen Rodriguez from St. Mary's Academy." Maria's heart leaped. Carmen was the admissions counselor at the private school she'd been dreaming of sending Diego and Carlos to. The same school where wealthy families sent their children for the best education money could buy. "I have good news," Carmen continued. "We've reviewed your application for financial aid, and we can offer Diego and Carlos partial scholarships for the fall semester. Combined with your contribution, we can make this work." Maria's eyes filled with tears. She'd been working toward this goal for 2 years, saving every extra penny and building her credit so she could qualify for the remaining tuition costs. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." After hanging up, Maria walked to the boys' bedroom and stood in the doorway, watching them sleep. Diego was sprawled across his bed with characteristic confidence, while Carlos curled up neatly under his covers, clutching his favorite stuffed elephant. "St. Mary's Academy," she whispered to them. "You're going to get the best education, and you're going to have every opportunity to succeed." She thought about Floyd, probably sleeping in some expensive bed somewhere, never knowing that he had 2 brilliant sons who were about to attend one of the city's most prestigious schools, never knowing that the woman he'd called trash was building something beautiful from the ground up. The irony wasn't lost on her. Floyd had married her when she was young and uncertain, then discarded her when she needed him most. But his cruelty had forced her to discover strength she'd never known she possessed. As Maria returned to her business planning, she felt that familiar fire burning in her chest, not the desperate panic of the early days, but something focused and purposeful. She was no longer the heartbroken woman Floyd had left behind. She was Maria Saavedra, successful entrepreneur and devoted mother, and she was just getting started. Floyd had thrown away something precious without recognizing its value, but Maria had taken that discarded life and built it into something extraordinary. The best part was that he had no idea what he'd lost or what she'd become in his absence. 10 years after Floyd's abandonment, Maria Saavedra stood in her corner office overlooking the city's business district, reviewing the morning schedule on her tablet. Elegancia Events, the company that had grown from her kitchen table catering business, now occupied the entire 15th floor of the prestigious Wellington building. The brass nameplate on her mahogany desk read, "Maria Saavedra, president, and CEO, and the view through her floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the city where she'd once struggled to survive. At 36, Maria had transformed not just her circumstances, but herself. The uncertain young woman who had once tried desperately to fit into Floyd's world was gone. In her place stood a confident businesswoman who belonged in any room she entered, not because someone else granted her access, but because she'd earned her place through talent, innovation, and relentless work. Mrs. Saavedra. Her assistant, Jennifer, appeared in the doorway. "The Patterson family is here for their consultation. Send them in, please. And remind me, I need to leave by 4:30 today for Diego and Carlos's academic awards ceremony." The Patterson consultation went smoothly. They wanted Elegancia Events to coordinate their son's wedding, a lavish affair with 300 guests, a budget of $150,000, and every detail customized to perfection. 5 years ago, such a contract would have seemed impossible. Now it was Tuesday's second appointment. "Your portfolio is remarkable," Mrs. Patterson said, flipping through the leather-bound album showcasing Maria's work. "The governor's charity gala last month was absolutely stunning, and I heard you coordinated the Sinclair merger celebration. Everyone's still talking about those ice sculptures that spelled out the company names." Maria smiled graciously. "Each event is unique to our client's vision. We specialize in creating experiences that reflect your family's values and celebrate your most important moments." The truth was, Elegancia Events had become the premier luxury event planning company in the region. Maria's combination of artistic vision, flawless execution, and genuine care for her clients had built a reputation that kept her booked solid for the next 20 months. She employed 18 full-time staff members and worked with a network of trusted vendors who competed for the privilege of being associated with her events. But more than the business success, what filled Maria with the deepest satisfaction was watching her sons flourish in ways that exceeded even her highest hopes. At 4:15, Maria left the office early to attend Diego and Carlos's awards ceremony at St. Mary's Academy. The private school had been the best investment she'd ever made, not just for the education, but for the confidence it had given her sons. She arrived at the prestigious campus and was struck by how natural it felt to walk through the marble hallways lined with portraits of distinguished alumni. The first time she'd brought the boys here for their entrance interview, she'd felt like an imposter. Now, as one of the school's major donors and a member of the parent advisory board, she belonged here as much as anyone. "Maria," Sarah Henderson, mother of one of Carlos's classmates, waved her over. "I was hoping to catch you. Did you get my message about the spring fundraising committee?" "Yes, I'll be happy to coordinate the silent auction," Maria replied. "Elegancia Events will handle it pro bono, of course." Sarah beamed. "You're incredible. I don't know how you manage everything. Your company, the boys, all your community involvement." The ceremony began, and Maria found her seat in the third row, reserved for families of honor students. She watched with immense pride as both her sons were called to the stage, but for very different achievements that reflected their distinct personalities. Diego was named Student Council President for the upcoming year, the youngest student ever elected to the position. At 10 years old, he possessed a natural charisma that drew people to him, combined with an ethical compass that Maria had worked hard to instill. He was the kind of leader who inspired others, not through dominance, but through genuine care for their welfare. Carlos received the Creative Arts Excellence Award for a short story he'd written about a single mother who built a business empire while raising twins. His teacher had submitted it to a national youth writing contest, where it had placed second among thousands of entries. Carlos had inherited Maria's emotional intelligence, but combined it with an artistic soul that saw beauty and meaning in everything around him. When they returned to their seats, Diego leaned over and whispered, "Thanks for being here, Mom. I know you had important meetings today." "There's nowhere else I'd rather be," Maria whispered back, meaning every word. Carlos, more observant than his brother, studied her face carefully. "Are you proud of us?" The question caught Maria off guard. Sweetheart, I'm so proud of you both that I sometimes can't breathe from the joy of it. You've become such remarkable young men. Good, Carlos said seriously, because we're really proud of you too. Tommy Henderson's mom said you're the most successful woman she knows. Later that evening, after celebrating at the boys' favorite restaurant, Maria tucked them into bed in their beautiful home in Riverside Hills. The house was a testament to how far they'd come. 5 bedrooms, a gourmet kitchen where Maria still loved to experiment with new recipes, and a backyard where the boys could play soccer with their friends. "Mom," Carlos said as she kissed his forehead, "can I ask you something that might be hard to answer?" Maria sat on the edge of his bed, recognizing his serious tone. "Of course, sweetheart. Do you ever think about our father? Not like missing him or anything?" he added quickly. "But wondering what his life is like now." The question was more complex than Carlos probably realized. "Sometimes," Maria admitted. "But not the way I used to." "How did you used to think about him?" Diego asked, appearing in the doorway in his pajamas. Maria considered how to answer honestly, without burdening them with her pain. "For a long time, I thought about him with hurt and anger. He'd made me feel worthless, and I carried that feeling around like a heavy stone." "But not anymore?" Carlos asked. "No, not anymore. Now, when I think about him, I mostly feel curious. I wonder if he's happy, if he ever thinks about the choices he made, if he knows what he missed by not being part of your lives." Diego climbed onto the bed beside his brother. "Do you think he knows about us, about what we've accomplished?" Maria pulled both boys close, overwhelmed by their maturity and insight. "I think there are probably moments when he wonders what happened to us, but honestly, it doesn't matter anymore. Whether he knows or not, we built something beautiful without him. Sometimes I wonder if we would have been different if he'd stayed," Carlos said quietly. "Different how? Maybe not as close to you. Maybe not as strong, I guess. Like we had to learn to take care of each other because it was just us 3. Maria felt tears prick her eyes. "You know what? I think you're absolutely right. The 3 of us became a team because we had to, and that made us stronger than most families ever get to be. Plus," Diego added with 10-year-old pragmatism, "if he was the kind of person who could leave his pregnant wife, we probably wouldn't have liked him very much anyway." As Maria turned out the lights and headed to her own room, she reflected on the journey that had brought them here. 10 years ago, she'd been broken, desperate, and convinced she was nothing. Tonight, she was the CEO of a successful company, the mother of 2 extraordinary children, and a respected member of her community. She'd proven Floyd wrong in every possible way. But more importantly, she'd proven something to herself. That worth isn't determined by someone else's opinion, no matter how cruelly they express it. Standing at her bedroom window, looking out at the city lights, Maria allowed herself to imagine what Floyd's life looked like now. Was he happy? Had he achieved everything he thought he wanted when he'd thrown away his family for someone better? The questions no longer came from a place of pain or even curiosity about reconciliation. They came from a place of genuine wonder about the path not taken. Floyd had made his choice based on what he thought would bring him happiness and success. Maria had made hers based on love and responsibility. Looking at the life she'd built, the sons she'd raised, and the respect she'd earned in her community, Maria knew without a doubt which choice had led to real fulfillment. She had learned that the best response to cruelty isn't revenge. It's building a life so meaningful and joyful that the person who tried to diminish you becomes irrelevant to your happiness. Floyd had called her nothing, but his opinion had long since lost any power to hurt her. Maria Saavedra was everything she'd chosen to become, and that transformation had been accomplished entirely through her own courage, love, and refusal to accept someone else's definition of her worth. Floyd Short stood on the balcony of his downtown penthouse, surveying the city below with the satisfaction of a man who believed he owned everything within sight. At 38, He had methodically achieved every goal he'd set for himself. A real estate empire worth millions, political connections that opened doors throughout the state, and now, the perfect woman to complete his carefully constructed image. But lately, in quiet moments like this, Floyd found his mind wandering to places he'd thought he'd permanently closed off. The silence of his perfect life had begun to feel hollow, and he couldn't shake the nagging sense that something essential was missing from all his success. "Darling, the wedding planner is here," Stephanie Williams called from inside the apartment, her voice carrying that breathless quality that had initially charmed him. "She wants to go over the final guest list." Floyd straightened his Italian silk tie and walked back into the living room, where Stephanie was arranging herself elegantly on their white leather sofa. At 28, she embodied everything he'd convinced himself he wanted. Blonde, beautiful, and from exactly the right kind of family. Her father owned a chain of luxury hotels across the Southeast. Her mother sat on the boards of 3 prestigious charities, and Stephanie herself moved through high society with the effortless grace of someone born to privilege. She was, Floyd had told himself repeatedly, his perfect match. Unlike his first marriage, this relationship made sense on paper. 2 successful people from similar backgrounds building a life that would be the envy of everyone who mattered. Mr. Short, the wedding planner, a severe woman named Ms. Chen, looked up from her tablet. "We have confirmations from 243 guests so far. The mayor's office called to confirm his attendance, and Senator Morrison's wife will be representing their family." Floyd nodded with satisfaction. This wedding would be the social event of the season, 500 guests at the Grand Belmont Hotel, with dinner catered by the city's most exclusive restaurant and entertainment provided by a jazz quartet that usually performed for heads of state. More importantly, it would be a public validation of his choices. Everyone who mattered would witness his triumph, proof that he had chosen correctly when he'd ended his first marriage for something better. "What about the press coverage?" Floyd asked. 3 newspapers will cover the society pages, plus Lifestyle magazine wants to do a 6-page feature spread," Ms. Chen replied efficiently. "This will definitely be one of the most photographed weddings of the year." That was exactly what Floyd wanted, but even as he planned this public celebration, he couldn't escape the strange restlessness that had been growing stronger over the past few months. Success, he was discovering, felt different than he'd expected. Emptier, somehow. "Oh, Floyd," Stephanie said suddenly, examining her perfectly manicured nails with the casual attention she gave most things. "Didn't you mention wanting to invite that woman from your past? Your first wife?" Floyd's jaw tightened at the reminder. "Yes, Maria Saavedra." "Have we sent her invitation yet?" The truth was, Floyd had been thinking about Maria more often than he cared to admit. Not with longing or regret. He'd convinced himself he felt neither, but with a nagging curiosity about what had happened to her after he'd left. 10 years of complete silence. No attempts at contact. No requests for money. Nothing. The absence of drama had been exactly what he'd wanted. But lately, it felt almost unsettling. "I have her address here." Ms. Chen consulted her list. 412 Maple Street, apartment 3B. Shall I add her to the formal invitation list? "Absolutely." Floyd's smile was cold and calculating. "Make sure she gets the full invitation package, the embossed stationery, the silk envelope, everything. I want her to understand exactly what kind of event this is." The decision wasn't entirely rational. Floyd knew there was something driving him to invite Maria that he couldn't quite name. Part curiosity, part cruelty, and perhaps part a need to prove to himself that his choices had been correct. Stephanie looked puzzled, her blue eyes showing the first spark of genuine interest she'd displayed all morning. "Why invite an ex-wife to your wedding? Isn't that asking for drama?" Floyd walked to the windows again, his hands clasped behind his back. "Let's call it closure, darling. Maria needs to see what real success looks like. She needs to understand the difference between her world and mine. But even as he said it, Floyd wasn't entirely sure what he expected to accomplish. In his mind, Maria was frozen in time, the broken, desperate woman he'd left behind 10 years ago. He imagined her still struggling, still marked by the poverty and failure he'd predicted for her. Inviting her would be a final demonstration of how right he'd been to leave, how much better his life had become without her dragging him down. "Where is Maple Street?" Stephanie asked, wrinkling her nose delicately. "I don't think I've ever heard of it." "The East Side," Floyd replied dismissively. "Definitely not your social circle, sweetheart." Ms. Chen cleared her throat diplomatically. "Actually, Mr. Short, I should mention I had to do some research to find the correct address. There are several Maria Saavedras in the city. The information I found suggests she may have moved around quite a bit over the years." "Perfect," Floyd said with satisfaction. "That's exactly what I expected." But something in Ms. Chen's tone suggested there was more to the story. "Sir, there was also some mention of children." Floyd's expression hardened. "That's not my concern." The conversation was interrupted by Stephanie's phone ringing with the distinctive tone she'd assigned to her wedding dress fittings. As she took the call, chattering about alterations and accessories, Floyd found his mind drifting again. Children. The word stirred something uncomfortable in his chest. Not regret exactly, but a strange hollowness he'd never quite managed to fill despite all his success. 3 days later, Maria was reviewing vendor contracts in her office when Jennifer knocked on the door, holding a cream-colored envelope with obvious curiosity. "This came by special delivery," Jennifer said, setting the envelope on Maria's desk. "Very fancy. Hand-delivered by a courier in a tuxedo, if you can believe that." Maria glanced at the envelope and immediately recognized the expensive paper stock and formal calligraphy. But it was the return address that made her blood run cold. Mr. and Mrs. Floyd Short. But that wasn't right. Floyd wasn't married, as far as she knew. He was still single. Unless... With trembling fingers, Maria opened the envelope and pulled out the thick, embossed invitation card. "Mr. Floyd Harrison Short and Miss Stephanie Marie Williams request the honor of your presence at their wedding ceremony, Saturday the 15th of June, at 6 in the evening, the Grand Belmont Hotel. Reception to follow. Black tie required." Maria stared at the invitation for a long moment, her heart pounding. Floyd was getting married. After 10 years of silence, he had chosen to invite her to witness his new beginning. But why? She turned the invitation over and found a handwritten note in Floyd's familiar scroll. "Maria, I thought you might enjoy seeing how well some people recover from their mistakes. I hope you'll be able to attend. It should be quite an educational experience for you. FS." The casual cruelty of the note hit her like a physical blow. Even after all these years, even with all her success and transformation, Floyd still saw her as someone beneath him, someone to be humiliated and dismissed. Maria set the invitation down carefully and walked to her window, looking out at the city she now knew so well. Floyd had no idea who she'd become. In his mind, she was probably still that broken woman he'd left behind, struggling in poverty and failure. This invitation wasn't about celebrating his happiness. It was about forcing her to witness what he perceived as her continued misery compared to his triumph. "Mrs. Saavedra?" Jennifer's voice was concerned. "Are you all right? You look upset." Maria turned back to her assistant, forcing a smile. "I'm fine. Just an invitation from someone I used to know. Must be quite someone to send such an elaborate invitation." "Oh, he thinks he is," Maria said quietly. After Jennifer left, Maria sat back down at her desk and read the invitation again. The Grand Belmont Hotel. She'd coordinated events there many times. Black tie required. She had a closet full of designer gowns now. The 15th of June. She was currently free that evening. Floyd expected her to either not show up at all or to arrive looking shabby and out of place, confirming his opinion that she'd never amounted to anything. He wanted to parade his success in front of her, to prove to himself and his new society friends that he'd been right to discard her. What Floyd didn't know was that Maria Saavedra was no longer the woman who could be intimidated or humiliated. She was no longer someone who would shrink away from a challenge or hide from confrontation. She picked up her phone and dialed Elena's number. "Elena, it's me. Are you free for lunch today? I have something interesting to show you." An hour later, Maria and Elena sat in their favorite cafe, the wedding invitation spread between them on the small table. Elena's eyes were wide with disbelief as she read Floyd's handwritten note for the third time. "I cannot believe this man," Elena said, her voice rising with indignation. "After 10 years of silence, he invites you to his wedding just to humiliate you. What kind of person does that?" "The kind of person who needs to prove he was right about everything," Maria said calmly, sipping her coffee. "He thinks I'm still that desperate woman who begged him not to leave." "You're not going, right?" Elena's voice was firm. "You're going to ignore this nonsense and throw the invitation where it belongs." Maria was quiet for a long moment, studying the elegant script on the invitation. "Actually, I think I am going to go." "Maria, no!" Elena reached across the table and grabbed her sister's hand. "Why would you put yourself through that? You've built such a beautiful life. Why give him the satisfaction?" "Because," Maria said slowly, a smile beginning to form on her lips. "He's expecting to see the old Maria, the broken, poor woman he left behind. He has no idea who I've become." Elena's expression shifted from concern to understanding. "You want to show him what he lost. I want to show him exactly what he threw away when he called me nothing." Maria's voice was steady and sure. "I want him to see Diego and Carlos, his sons that he never wanted. I want him to see the successful businesswoman I became, the life I built from the ashes he left behind." "The twins?" Elena breathed. "You're going to bring the boys?" "They're 10 years old, Elena. Old enough to handle a formal event, and definitely old enough to see their mother celebrated for who she really is." Maria's eyes sparkled with purpose. "Floyd thinks he's setting up my humiliation. Instead, he's giving me the perfect opportunity to show him the truth." Elena was quiet for a moment, then a slow smile spread across her face. "You know what? You're absolutely right. That man has no idea what's coming for him." "None at all," Maria agreed. "He's about to learn that when you throw away something precious, you don't get to decide what it becomes in your absence." She folded the invitation carefully and put it back in her purse. "I need to start planning. The boys will need formal wear, and I'll need something spectacular to wear." "This is going to be expensive," Elena warned. "Are you sure you want to spend that kind of money just to prove a point?" Maria thought about all the years of struggle, all the nights she'd cried herself to sleep wondering if she was strong enough to raise her sons alone, all the times she doubted herself because of Floyd's cruel words. "Elena," she said firmly, "there's no amount of money I wouldn't spend to show Floyd Short exactly who he's dealing with now." As they left the cafe, Maria felt that familiar fire burning in her chest, the same sense of purpose that had carried her through night school, through building her business, through every challenge of the past 10 years. Floyd thought he was orchestrating her humiliation. Instead, he'd just given her the stage for her greatest triumph. The broken woman he'd discarded was long gone. In her place stood Maria Saavedra, and she was ready to show the world exactly what Floyd Short had been foolish enough to throw away.